Hello and welcome to a special collaborative episode of Taking the Supply Chain Pulse with the Bellwether League. I'm Megan with St. Ange Company, and we're glad to have you with us. Joining us today is Rick Barlow, the co-founder and executive director of the Bellwether League Foundation and the inaugural Cranzy Award winner. This episode delivers an engaging discussion with plenty of insights to take away. Now let's get started with your host, Fred Kranz.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Fred, it is always a pleasure and a privilege to chat with you in any way, shape, or form. So glad to be here.
Well, folks, generally speaking, the St. Ange podcast is audio only. But since we're pairing up with the Bellwether League, there's a possibility that the Bellwether League output from this mutual work may have video in it. And so you can see, I will describe this to the audio folks. Rick is wearing his white mock turtleneck, and well, really turtleneck. And is that a peach colored blazer?
It is. I was going to ask you to do, that bit from Late Night with David Letterman, or, what's Hal wearing? You can do what's Rick wearing? And so you've got it so far, yeah. And I'm also doing it as an homage to you. And then, of course, as I mentioned at Balefire 18 a week or so ago, I definitely wore these from the Fred Kranz Pants Club that I was so honored to receive there. Second recipient, I believe you said, right?
Actually, you're the first recipient of the Cranzy Award. The award was originally entitled by me the Fred Kranz Pants Award, and that went to Randy Bradley. But then Joe Nemeth, who is a big influence on our podcast, said that we should change the name of the award to the Cranzy Award.
Very creative.
And so you're the first winner of the Cranzy Award. And for those of you who I'll have to describe the pants that Rick is wearing. They have a pale blue background with a large lighthouse that's red and white in there. And they're just apropos for the Bellwether League in general. So, Rick, why don't you tell us, what is the Bellwether League Foundation and what is its mission?
Well, Bellwether League Foundation is a 501c3 nonprofit, non-stock charitable organization. And we set it up basically to recognize, to honor, salute supply chain leaders, supply chain innovators, folks who are really deep thinkers in supply chain and are making great strides in improving the profession and the industry. We set it up as really kind of a parent company for the Healthcare Supply Chain Leadership Hall of Fame, because we also wanted to expand in some other areas like education and scholarships to students eventually, and to maybe do a little bit of consulting, which we kind of veered into a little bit. So it took a number of years, but some of that has come to fruition here in the 21st century. So we're pretty proud of that and happy of that. And so we're thinking that with these expansions, we will not be, overlooking our main event, of course, which is that Healthcare Supply Chain Leadership Hall of Fame.
So what's the meaning behind the name?
Well, there's a confidential explanation or motivation behind it that maybe I'll share in my memoirs sometime soon. But by definition, a bellwether bellwether represents kind of an indicator or a predictor of something. And in our case, it's best illustrated by the lighthouse logo behind me. The lighthouse is something that either serves as a beacon of hope for people looking for land if they're a sea, or it's also a warning to stay away from the rocks if you're at sea and there's fog all around. So it has a beneficial representation either way. One, it gives you hope. Two, it keeps you out of danger. But in the case of this regard, it represents innovative thinking, leadership done by supply chain to help its customers, which is just about everybody in the healthcare organization. And of course, League is a group of like-minded individuals. So we put the two together to represent healthcare supply chain leaders, pioneers, visionaries, innovators, and the like.
Well, after spending my whole life watching professional wrestling, I think it is a good idea to stay away from The Rock.
Well, but I'm wondering if at some of our events we need to introduce the turnbuckle moves, by some famous individuals in that profession.
There you go. So how did the idea of the Bellwether League come about? How did the idea of the Healthcare Supply Chain Hall of Fame come about?
It was late 2006, very early 2007. I was working on an editorial project for a client, and what I had come up with, I was researching and reporting on the 30 most influential people in supply chain. My goal then was, for all time, going way back. But I found that as I started doing this and started talking to people, this was going to be this was going to turn out to be a massive project that I either needed more time to do because I only had a short time in order to make it happen, or I needed to recruit a bunch of people to help me out. So what I did is I massaged the topic a little bit and got it to something more manageable. But in my research, I talked to a lot of folks and I was hoping these folks had such deep memories that they could help me out going all the way back as far as we could. And that didn't turn out to be the case in a lot of respects. And so, I had something like 25, 30 calls I had made. One of the calls I had made was a veteran consultant decades, and that was Jamie Kowalski. And he was one of the ones that I reached out to because of his experience in the industry and his longevity. I figured he would know a lot of names and then could put me on the right track as I continued my research. But in talking with Jamie, periodically, we came to realize that this was going to be a little bit harder than we had anticipated. And for me, specifically. Now, as well as I do that Jamie is an avid baseball fan, just like you and just like Barbara Strain, the Bellwether League board chairman. And so, during our conversations, we'd talk about, baseball, and we got to the subject of a Hall of Fame. Now, if you're talking about Hall of Fame with me and baseball, I will typically bring up Ron Santo from the '69 Cubs, and the endless calls for him to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame. He eventually got in there, but back then it was always a case of wait until next year. We started talking about a Hall of Fame in baseball, and the conversation then kind of migrated toward, well, gee, Rick, you're having challenges researching a lot of these folks that you want to profile. We started talking about, hey, what if we did a Hall of Fame for healthcare supply chain? And that kind of set into motion something that really blossomed from there. The idea of doing a lot more research on Hall of Fame caliber supply chain leaders that would go back decades, if not a century, or however long ago we could go. So Jamie and I decided to put our heads together and launch the organization.
So what was the easiest part about launching the organization?
coming up with the idea behind it, and generating moral support. The folks that we got together kind of dovetailed from my project. It was probably one of the first conference calls I ever had with more than like 20 or 30 people on it. I had been on international press calls in the past with reporters and so forth all around the country. But this was something a little bit more personal, and getting all these folks on a call and making sure that everyone could make recommendations and suggestions and whatnot. So, but people on the call immediately saw it as the right thing to do, and there was a lot of verbal support behind it. And we knew, Jamie and I knew that we touched a nerve, and this was a way of, delving into the past, looking into some of the foundational elements of healthcare supply chain, where it came from, and potentially broadcast, where it's going.
So what were the difficulties you faced? What was the most difficult thing you had to overcome?
Believe it or not, there were probably three. The first one had to do with our attorney. We were starting this from scratch, and we had gone to an attorney that was recommended to us, and we asked the attorney that we'd like to start as a 501c3 charitable nonprofit charity, and she didn't see, based on the concept that we were sharing with her, what we wanted to do with a Hall of Fame honoring people. She didn't see that would work, and so she initially set us up as a 501c6 not for profit, and so we operated that way until about 2021, when we were able to convert to a 501c3. So that was one. The second part was the bank. So we had to set up an account for the organization, and we were a few years, in 2007, we were a few years from 9/11, and the government had found during that time frame that terrorist organizations were funneling a lot of money through nonprofit, not-for-profit organizations, that may or may not have been related to, what they were doing in their activities. And so starting a not-for-profit or a nonprofit organization from scratch, that didn't matter how magnanimous we were or generous we were or what we were trying to do. I had to jump through a lot of hoops in order to kind of convince the bank that we were legit and what we were trying to do, and get that set up. So there was a lot of red tape that we had to go through, and given the circumstances of the time, I guess it was understandable, but it was a lot more difficult than I thought it was, that I thought it would turn out to be. And the third thing, of course, is generating support through generation, through donations and sponsorships. But we had some interesting timing in when we were going to have our first event and launch our first event in the fall of 2008. Our event actually happened smack dab in the middle of the stock market crash. That it started in mid-September and went till late October, and we launched our first event during Materials Management Week of October of 2008, like right in the middle of that. And so we were actually happy that we got a number of companies to support us early on. Owens and Minor was our first company. Med Assets, Premier, Novation, just a few of the ones, and of course, my company as well. Because as I think I've told you and I've told others, if I'm not willing to put up support for an organization that we're creating, then how can I ask others to do it? But it was these companies saw the need. They helped us out very early on, and despite the economic turmoil that was going on, we were able to get this off the ground. We had an intimate affair of a small group there, but it was a very emotional time. We had some very prominent figures there, and I think it was when Jamie and I saw the emotional responses that we were getting from people accepting their awards and from all the chatter around the ballroom. Actually, it was a very small ballroom during that first event. We knew we were on something, and we knew that this concept had legs. And there are a lot of organizations that have awards out there, and those are great. When we salute all of them, they all have specific purposes, whether a vendor starts it to recognize its customers, or an association starts it to recognize people within their group doing things. It's all great. We wanted to do something just a little bit different that served as more of an overlay of the industry, like the Oscars or the Emmys or even the Granzies, So we just wouldn't give out handsome trousers to our people. We would just give out crystal.
There you go. No need to bring the Cranzies in to make that comparison. So what's interesting, I think, as you look at a difference between the Bellwether League and any of the major sports Hall of Fame, all those people are well known all over the country. If Joe Doe doesn't make it to the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, but he was on the roster of the Cubs for a year, he got to play in front of a few million fans in his life and got that recognition of being a Major League Baseball player. Most of what happens in healthcare, nobody knows these people.
Before we dive back in, you may be asking yourself, is my supply chain future ready? At St. Ange Company, we don't just optimize logistics, we engineer smarter, leaner, and more resilient systems from end to end. From manufacturing to retail to healthcare, our experts bring decades of experience and cutting-edge strategies to transform your operations. Visit and discover how we're shaping the future of supply chain, one solution at a time.
And when you started this in 2007, 2008, there was Hospital Purchasing News, a few other periodicals. There wasn't much continuity or network continuity to the industry, and that's improved over time. So, who were some of your? Give me 3 or 4 of your first notable honorees, and why they were, and what the reasons for which they were selected.
Yeah, you raise a great point, and that's one of the motivations behind why we wanted to start Bellwether League Foundation. It's the fact that healthcare supply chain, we didn't feel was getting the exposure, the respect it deserved for everything that it does. As I mentioned at BL Fire 18, everything runs on supply chain. It touches everything and everyone. And, you mentioned, these publications that were out there, and they do an excellent job of sharing the stories of people, and it could be, from the famous folks, that we all the famous names we know and love and respect, to those that are serving quietly in the trenches. And that's something that we wanted to bring to the forefront with Bellwether League Foundation. It's not really we didn't design it as something that would recognize all stars and whatnot. We were recognizing people making a difference, whether you were publicly known and feted, or whether you were quietly serving somewhere. It's open to everybody based on your achievements that are reported in your nomination petition, the accomplishments that you're doing, how you're volunteering, how you're helping clinicians and so forth. So, you don't have to be famous to be recognized by Bellwether League Foundation. But I will say that once you're recognized by Bellwether League Foundation and the Healthcare Supply Chain Leadership Hall of Fame, we hope you will become famous and be an example to others. But going back to your question, I don't know if you're referring to folks in our first class or you're focused on the earliest historical figures. So I guess I'll go with the historical figures, because one of the things that one of my personal motivations in co-founding Bellwether League Foundation was for the organization to serve as at first the unofficial, but now I think we can call it the official historian of the industry and going back. And we've had some really, I had some folks on my list that I wanted to really profile and recognize and share with the industry. I'll just give you a few. I think the one that I initially raised the most eyebrows was perhaps our oldest or perhaps most vintage, and that would be Clara Barton, from most known for the American Red Cross and for helping the troops during the Civil War. Back in a number of years ago, Nate Mickish, who was the first future famer on Bellwether League's board of directors, he contacted me and said, Rick, I have an idea for a nominee, and I want you to hear me out. I don't want you to think that I'm crazy or anything. And he's like, I want to nominate Clara Barton, and here's why. And once he mentioned the name and started talking, I was already, the wheels were already going in my head, and I thought it was a brilliant idea. And so he and I worked together on pulling her nomination together and profiling her. And so, I and he were so proud of bringing her forward. And another one that I'll mention is the founder of Hospital Bureau. And this was an individual on my list from the very start. When I was chatting with people during my earlier editorial project, I knew I wanted to focus on whoever founded what was known as the first GPO in the nation. Now, back in the 19-teens, it was known as cooperative purchasing services, or collaborative purchasing services back then. And so I had this individual on my list. We did induct someone who was kind of the big promoter of Hospital Bureau in the 1950s and 60s, and he was very prominent in the industry back then. That was George Ainsworth. But I wanted to go back to the founder, and it was always my intention to if I could find the founders of a lot of these organizations that we know of today that are either still around or became part of other organizations that work in the healthcare supply chain industry and profession. And so I would be doing it on the side as I'm researching other individuals that we are nominating, or if I'm checking up on nominations that come in. And I remember one night, it was probably in the 2020 teens, I was doing some searching, and then I got off on a rabbit trail, and I'm going through, and I started feeling that I was getting close. I was getting close to the guy that I really wanted. If it was a guy or I didn't know who it was. And I started, I somehow got into researching railroads and whatnot. And that's when I found the guy deeply embedded in a story. I think it was a New York Times story or something. I was looking through archives going back to like 1911. And 1910, 1911, and that's when I found William Thorne, and oh man, it was, the elation of finally, getting what had been my unicorn, my holy grail or whatever. It was great. We were able to induct him in the 2017 class, which was our 10th anniversary, and so that was great. There are several other individuals that I think were historical. Irving Mills, who was responsible for, what eventually became Medline. Just recently, we inducted Pat Neff Groner, who was the co-founder of VHA. So a lot of individuals. These are, The other one, the annual award that ARM gives out, the George Gossett Award. We were able to induct him. I was able to talk with his son, and what a truly remarkable individual George Gossett was to supply chain. And I mean, this was a guy that you really wanted to know, not only to have as a colleague and a friend, but as someone who could, buttress you in times of need, and he would do it as well. Didn't matter if you were a competitor or not, he would be there for you. Just tremendous individual. I'm thinking of Stan Costello as well from the Healthcare Materials Management Society. These are names from the past that people may know of. Some they may not, recall or remember. Some may be who, but that's what I like to do with this organization. For people to say, I didn't know that, or wow, who is this person, and how did we not know about him or her until right now? So I guess another one would be Lillian Matiska, who was in our second class, I believe, in 2009. She was someone who was instrumental in starting a hospital from scratch, as well as being the supply chain leader at that hospital. So that was a time when supply chain, she made a situation where she was very influential with the C-suite back then, and really made some headway for supply chain and in creating a hospital. So those are just a few.
Okay, so we're nearing the end of our allotted time, so we're going to have to go rapid fire on some of these things, okay?
I'll have to talk like the FedEx guy.
What are the categories of the Bellwether League Awards, and what does each one mean?
There are three. We started out with the Bellwether honoree that honors those are the ones that are inducted into the Hall of Fame. They are at or near the end of their career, and they have a minimum of 25 years experience. We did that for a number of years, and then about 10 years ago, we decided to flip it and go to the earliest group and create a Future Famers. And these are not rising stars. The Future Famers are within like a dozen years, 10 to 12 years of the start of their career. These are folks that we recognize as being Future Famers or potential Hall of Famers. And then a number of years ago, we then completed the span with an award that recognizes those active in the field, and we named it after our first inductee, which is Dean S. Ammer, PhD. So there are three.
Okay, well, how is the Bellwether League funded?
Through the generosity of corporations and professionals in what I would call a multifaceted industry, and we have companies and individuals who will support us annually through commitments. They'll support us monthly through commitments. We'll have others that support us through our event, and then through periodic donations. So it's strictly from individuals and companies willing to support this cause, to promote and recognize supply chain.
And what events does the Bellwether League sponsor or host?
Well, we have our annual event. We call it, the acronym is BLFIRE, and that stands for Bellwether League Foundation Induction and Recognition Event. That's where we recognize Future Famers, Ammer honorees, and we induct the Bellwether honorees into the Healthcare Supply Chain Leadership Hall of Fame. We just had ours about a few weeks ago on the eve of Veterans Day and on the 250th anniversary of the U.S. Marine Corps. And prior to that, we held it during the first Monday of Healthcare Supply Chain Management Week. But so we have that. And then what we're trying to do now is launch a Bellwether League Goes Back to School program where we'll go to college campuses and speak to college campuses about the benefits and possibilities of a career in healthcare supply chain. And enables us, experts like you and people on the board and on the advisory council to share their expertise and their experience with students to get them jazzed about not just about supply chain, because a lot of them are already interested in supply chain outside of healthcare, but to get them interested about supply chain within healthcare. And then, we also have our supply chain maturity assessment tool, our SCMAT program that we're trying to get off the ground to help healthcare facilities kind of check out their supply chain operations. It's kind of an offshoot of the consulting idea that I had mentioned early on.
Well, if someone were listening in right now,
yeah,
and wanted to become involved with the Bellwether League, what's the best way they could do that?
Contact me. I'd love to chat with them. We always would welcome new folks getting involved, those that are interested in learning more about the foundation, learning more about the Hall of Fame. What I always tell people, if they're new to BLF, which is Bellwether League Foundation, I say, attend one of our events, because if you do that, you'll understand the emotional appeal and you'll get the gravity of what's going on and what we're trying to do. Two, I ask them, hey, have you nominated someone? I mean, chances are you know of someone that is worthy of recognition or worthy of induction into the Hall of Fame. Go to the website, download the appropriate nomination form, fill it out, send it in. They can also participate in committees. They can participate in our advisory council. And of course, we always welcome donations and sponsorships and, the fiscal help that the organization needs to survive and thrive and continue to do what we do best and what we think the industry and the profession needs, which is recognize and honor and promote healthcare supply chain.
Well, hey, these are all the questions that I've had. Rick, is there anything out there that I didn't cover that you'd like to mention?
Well, I mean, what Bellwether League Foundation means to me. It's an opportunity to recognize, salute, and honor folks in the industry that deserve it, that have earned it, so that the industry can always remember them. I guess my question to you is, you were inducted in 2020. What does being inducted to the Hall of Fame mean to you and your ongoing participation with Bellwether League Foundation?
Well, I thought that the only reason that I was inducted into the Bellwether League was so that Clara Barton would have someone to sit with. And then I realized that she died in 1912, so that must not have been the case.
She would have admired your fashion sense, believe me.
No, it's really funny because I will tell what it means to me by what I've seen that it means to other people. If it's a little circuitous here, but last year I nominated Gail Kovacs, and I saw she gave a heartfelt acceptance speech. This year, Mike Langlois and Joni Rittler, people that really were surprised and overwhelmed and honored to be part of the group. I know a lot of the Bellwethers that probably, especially in the earlier groups, many of the people probably expected that if there were a Hall of Fame, yes, I'll be there. But that doesn't really impact me as much as I see the people that were surprised. Most of the people in our business work 30, 40 years doing thankless tasks, and since they're thankless tasks, they receive no thanks or little thanks. And to have someone not only recognize them, but then bring them forward and recognize them in front of their family and peers is really a heartfelt thing. And I was overwhelmed, and I never had thought that I'd be a Bellwether. Number one. Number two, since I've been in the Bellwether League and now that I'm on the board and I see the process that's involved, hell, it's easier to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame if you haven't beaten your wife or taken steroids than it is to get into the Bellwether League. It's a very, very arduous activity to get there. So it means everything to me to be there. I think it's great. I think I think, though, from an operational standpoint, honoring the younger and the middle career folks is more important to the industry, because the hardest thing for the healthcare supply chain is to acquire good talent and encourage good talent, keep good talent. And these awards give recognition and help retain the really good folks that we need out there.
I agree. Your sentiment is precisely what Jamie and I thought when we created this and we wanted to carry this forward. And you mentioned the process of doing it. I want to give a shout out to Jamie, who kind of came up with the matrix that we at least used to start, and we've since improved that matrix, but we wanted to reinforce the fact that, this wasn't a popularity contest or an old boys club or anything like that. When you submit a nomination, I read every single word in every single nomination that comes in, and it goes through a very, very detailed process. And we've got videos on the website that not only talk about how to nominate someone, but it also talks about the process by which we change a nominee to someone who's recognized or inducted. And so it's come a long way. I'm particularly proud of how the process has progressed and developed. And I think it's good for the credibility of the organization, but it's also good for the credibility of the individuals being recognized, because they know that they are being recognized truly for who they are based on what they do or what they did, and not so much on reputation. It's not, hey, he's a nice guy or she's a nice gal, let's put her in. No. It's what you have contributed to the profession, to the culture, to society. And these are stories that need to be shared, because they not only reflect that person, but also can serve as examples for those that are going forward.
Well, Rick, thanks so much for your leadership in the Bellwether League. Thanks for
Fred.
being a friend for 30 plus years. I never would have made it to the Bellwether League if you hadn't published the completely innocuous stuff that I've written over the years. I appreciate that. Thank you.
I wish you the same. Thanks, Fred.
Well, that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and connect with us online so you'll never miss an episode and can catch up on all the ones you might have missed. Got a topic you're fired up about, or maybe you want to be a guest on the show? Fred would love to hear from you. Just reach out at fcrans@stonge.com. We'll see you next time.